If one should arise during the meeting, you can claim at that time. Item number 3, Community Living, Owen Sound and District. Good morning, Joanne Young. You have the floor.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you. Just wait for presentation to come up. There we go. So I'll be skipping through the first several slides fairly quickly so we can get to the part of the presentation that addresses the work that we do with people with developmental disabilities, with mental health and substance use and precarious housing issues. But to understand us as an organization, I'll kind of outline those things in the beginning. So in January 1st, 2022, 3 organizations came under one umbrella after many years of working towards that. And we are now called TASO, which means the Tri-Alliance Support Services Organization. And that TASO organization is the back office, of which I am a part of. And I support all 3 organizations, which includes Community Living Owen Sound, Bruce Peninsula Association for Community Living, and Community Living Walkerton. And I support all 3 organizations as the Director of Specialized Services. So overseeing and supporting all 3 organizations with issues and concerns and crises that resolve around what comes up in people's lives and within the organization to be able to get things done. I work very, very closely with the ministry and with our community partners as well. So the work of this task force is very near and dear to my heart. I also come out of the violence against women and homeless sector, working as an executive director in those sectors for many, many years before I came back to this sector. So I bring that knowledge and understanding to the plate as well. So next slide, please. Oh, there we go. So that just kind of explains what I've just said. Next slide. So that this just shows you where the offices for each of these organizations are. Sorry. So Bruce Peninsula provides supports for South Bruce Peninsula and up along right up to Tobermory. Community Living Owen Sound and District, we go from Port Elgin, Saugeen Shores across to Owen Sound, and then Walkerton, Community Living Walkerton, we're in the Brockton area and provide supports to people within the surrounding area as well. Next slide, please. Our governance, each agency has its own board. So each agency is actually still its own entity. It is our management structure and above, and our administrative structure where we fall under one to support all 3 agencies. And each agency has its own board, but then selects 2 representatives from each board to sit on the TASO board. The Community Living Owen Sound board, so this is going to become my focus. We have a 12-member board, and board members are elected at our AGM. Our AGM is held in June every year, and our board of directors has a wide variety of background and experiences, as all boards should have, which includes as well is what we call a self-advocate, so that it is a program participant who sits on our board and represents our program and has a voice for program participants on our board as well. Next slide, please. So next slide. So this is our mission and our core values. And our mission is to assist people with developmental needs to live, work, and participate fully in the community as valued partners. And our values, dignity and worth of all people, mutual respect and healthy relationships, family and friends, privacy and confidentiality, informed choice, risk, opportunity, and lifelong learning, and community inclusion. Next slide, please. Our funding, we are funded by the Ministry of Children, Community, and Social Services. We have a budget of $8.13 million, and there's a breakdown there for you as to where our funding is allocated to. So 70% is allocated to our residential services. Our residential services includes our supported group living homes, but also what we call our supported independent living. That comes under residential services by the ministry description. And it is people, the people that I'll be talking about shortly, many of them come under that supported independent living umbrella. And then 23% of our budget goes towards community supports, which some of those supports for people within the supported independent living comes under that portion of the budget as well. And then 9% for our children's services. Next slide, please. So who we support: adults 18 and over with a developmental disability, infants, children, youth, and their families, and that comes under that slim portion of children's funding. And then the people that we do support often have complex needs and or dual diagnoses, which includes physical challenges or disabilities, behavioral challenges, mental health challenges, and we are seeing more and more of that, mental health challenges and substance use challenges. Next slide, please. So our core services and supports. Next slide. So I'm going to leave this one for you to read on your own, because please feel free to, distribute this slide deck to everybody on the committee. Next slide, please, because the more important ones come in under here in the next slide. So our group living is our adults who live together with residential supports 24 hours a day. Our group living homes have no more than 4 people that live in it. The picture here, that is a picture of one of our group living homes. Then we have host family. We have youth that come out of the foster care system. And when they transition to the adult system, they often want to, and the foster family as well, often want that youth to continue to live with them. So they transition from being a foster family to a host family. So they just continue on as they have been, only it's the adult system that then oversees those supports versus the foster care system. And we have strict regulations. We've compliance regulations that we are required to have transfer over and to be able to follow. Then we have our supported independent living. So what that is people who live independently, and they receive several hours a week of individualized in-home support from our staff to assist them with daily living routines, assist them with, planning for things that they have to do, appointments, all of that kind of thing. And then we take a case management approach with that. And then enhanced supported living. We have a few people who require one-to-one or two-to-one support at all times in order to live their best lives, in order to keep them out of the justice system or out of the hospital system. So we have several situations right now where we are providing those supports. Next slide, please. Then we have our community participation and day supports. So those supports, so we have right beside City Hall there, we've got what we call the community links, and that is our day activity program where we put out calendars and people can sign up to do those activities. Those activities are done both in that building, or we do things like cross-country skiing, snowshoeing in the winter, and encourage people to develop friendships and connections with each other and start doing those kinds of things on their own. Then we have the other portion to community participation is to people who live at home with their families who are not eligible for supported independent living because they're not living by themselves. So we support those people who live with their families who want to be out in the community and need that support to do that. And we do that with families and with those people one-on-one. Then we have what's called Passport. So the ministry is moving towards individualized funding for all adults aged 18 and over. That process started a few years ago. The amount of funding that people are eligible for is dependent on their support needs, but it starts at $5,000 a year. And then people can take those funds and purchase supports. They can purchase a planner to help them plan things out. They can, there's opportunities to purchase things to help them connect in community. So during the pandemic, they were, one of the things on the list that they could purchase were things like iPads, tablets, smart TVs, those kinds of things. And then our staff, if they were connected with one of our staff, would help them get those kinds of things set up and help teach them how to use that effectively. Next slide, please. We have two very unique programs that we have implemented in recent years. The bottom one, the 1290s apartment, that is the old CAS office from years ago. We purchased that. And we, on the top floor of that, we have 6 apartments. And they're all 1-bedroom apartments. We have 2 young ladies that are about to each move into an apartment that require 24-hour supports. So those 2 apartments will be considered under our supported group living. But the other 4 apartments are young people who are in the midst of developing skills and to be able to transition to a full supported independent living model. So what it is when they move into here, it's a modified supported independent living model to support them to learn those skills to be able to take that next step to independence. So we opened that program in 2018. And in the middle of a pandemic, we opened River House. And River House is over on 14th on the west side of town. It's a 2-bedroom apartment, 1 bedroom upstairs, one apartment upstairs, 1 apartment downstairs. The apartment upstairs has somebody that we inherited, who we already supported in a supported independent living program. But the downstairs is our youth transition apartment. So it's youth who are coming right out of the children's system whether it be foster care or having what we call complex special needs because of high risk for either behavior or mental health or and or addiction issues. So we wrap a team around them when they come in. We have staff through the night, and again, support them to learn the skills to be able to move on. We've had 2 youth move through that program and are in the midst of doing a transition to a 3rd youth. The 2 youth that moved in were very, very high risk youth that people that knew them in their younger teens are absolutely shocked that they have not gotten involved in the street life and all of that kind of thing. And they're doing exceptionally well. So we've proven the effectiveness of wrapping supports around people in a more preventative way instead of reacting once they've been with us for a while and start going off the rails. Next slide, please. So this just breaks down for you the number of people that we support through community living, Owen Sound and District. And what we're going to focus on now is what I've got highlighted in yellow there, and that's the supported independent living supports. We currently support 76 people in what we call our SIL program. Next slide, please. So if we break that down to look at who from those people that we support in that program, that's 76. 16 of those people, or 21.6%, have significant mental health and or substance use issues. 12 of those 16 people, 75%, are precariously housed or experiencing homelessness, which has meant for us a shift in how staff focus on supports for people. It was interesting as I was going through the list a few weeks ago, just to kind of get my head around who these people are, because I deal with them generally on an independent basis. So I took that and I broke it out and did an analysis of the group itself. And of those 16 people, 14 of them are youth who have either just transitioned or transitioned from the children's sector to the adult sector within the last 6 years. And that is huge, because it bears out what we are seeing. At a later slide, it talks about trends. It bears out what we are seeing. And what we are seeing is that with our transitional aged youth, I am also the chairperson and coordinator for the transitional aged youth planning for the Grey and Bruce region. So I make sure that planning for youth who have complex special needs or are coming out of the foster care system, I make sure that like when we assign them to agencies, that planning is appropriate planning is happening. And those more complex people, supporting that agencies from the background with planning and connecting with the ministry as well to when we're hitting roadblocks and whatnot. So what we've been seeing, and I've been the chair of that committee for 7 years now. And what we anecdotally have been seeing is that we're seeing a rise in the numbers of complex youth. And those complex, the rise in the number of complex youth is not just youth with developmental disabilities and physical disabilities, but more so youth with developmental disabilities who in the past would not have been eligible for our supports. The ministry, the province made changes in 2008 in how people were deemed eligible for adult supports, where before it was just looking at what their intellectual disability was and whether they had an intellectual disability and whether that intellectual disability was at a certain point. As of 2008, they changed that and changed it to looking at functional analyses as well. And those functional analyses look at mental health and the impact mental health has on their ability to function, looks at behavior, the ability of them to function because of those behaviors. And what we're finding, I'm also a part of now a research committee. We've done one round of research, and that research is several directors of services like myself who came together and have done it. We're now in our second round of research looking at this, and it is bearing out that youth who at one point were not eligible for our supports because of the changes in 2008 are now eligible for our support. So we are seeing more and more youth who are coming our way who have what, for lack of better words, have more of a quote unquote borderline developmental disability, but their mental health, behavior, substance use issues all put them over that line in requiring supports. So our trend is truly seeing, and I've just finished doing our year-over-year analysis of who's come to our table. We have seen a drastic increase this year in the number of youth that have been brought to our table for planning. With, again, the majority of them having these dual diagnoses as outlined here. So our staff, as a result of all of this, our staffing, who in the past they're trained in supporting people with different types of syndromes and how to support them, to support people with cerebral palsy or Down syndrome, and how to do all of the pieces that go with that. Well, now we are having to look for staff who have training with youth, who have training in mental health, who have training in substance use, and looking for staff who are resilient. We've recently hired staff who worked in the homeless sector in Toronto, because as you can see, 12 of those 16 people, 75% of those 16 people are either precariously housed or currently experiencing homelessness. And chronic homelessness with some of them. Next slide, please.
Joanne?
Yes.
Sorry, can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah.
How to say this nicely? The province changed the eligibility requirements. The folks that you are now responsible for, or who are now eligible for your supports, used to get their support from somewhere else?
No.
They just were not supported.
They were not supported.
Okay. And with this change to the eligibility, did you see a corresponding increase or enhancement to the resources that you have available to you to provide these services?
So how it works, so perfect segue into the so this is all a part of, and I'll let you read the slide here that talks to how people access adult supports. So with these youth, they go through this process when they're 17 to get confirmed that they are eligible to then get what we call the SIS done, which is the support intensity scale. So they're deemed eligible. Then the support intensity scale, it's an assessment tool that gets done. From that, SIS is what our acronym for that. From that SIS, it determines what their level of support needs are. So people would come into service in two ways at that point. If they're coming out of a system, so if there's somebody who just requires regular supports, that kind of thing, and they have no money attached to them, they sit on a wait list. But these youth that we're talking about, the youth that come out of the child welfare system, from the foster care system, or if they've had complex special needs funding attached to them. So their needs have been such as a youth that they've required extra supports, and they've had dollars attached to them because of that. So what we do is we take that SIS, we get to know the youth when they, before they turn 18, because we ask that their names be brought to us as soon as possible after the age of 14. Sometimes they don't get to us until they're 16, 17, but we ask that they come to our table as soon as possible after 14. What we do then is we assign an adult agency to them, depending on where they want to live and what services can be provided. So just by the very nature of the size of Owen Sound is the largest community and whatnot. More than, I would say, about 75% of those youth end up coming through community living Owen Sound. So what we do then is, as soon as their name has been brought to the table, we start spending time. We do this part on our own dollar, because we don't get extra money to spend, once a month, an hour or two getting to know this youth over a period of time. But it's in the youth's best interest for us to really know who they are, what they need, what their wants are, all of that kind of thing. So we spend time getting to know them. And then as soon as their SIS is completed, when they are 17, we know them well enough that we develop a proposal, and we submit that proposal to the ministry. So we are able to bring in extra funding to support that youth. And yeah, so we've got quite the list of youth who have come into us through that process over the last several years now.
Do they also qualify, some of them, for ODSP?
They all qualify for ODSP. So their ODSP pays their rent, pays their food, all of that kind of thing.
Such as it does.
Exactly, such as it does.
Yes, as far as you can stretch $700.
And that's one of our gaps, of course, is the housing piece, right? And that's, in our small way, is where we've been trying to address it through the development of our 6th Ave building, putting the transitional aged youth piece in, instead of putting them out into an apartment on their own. Really teaching them so that it becomes easier to find something to suit their needs. So, but it is one of the things that we have highlighted under what our TASO umbrella. So not just Owen Sound, but broadly across the region is that housing piece, that need for housing. So as we're, moving forward, that will be something that we'll be looking at. But right now we're still in the midst of our transition, right? But it is on our agenda to be looking at.
So the $740 or whatever they get from ODSP, and then you said the additional, then the other money is the passport money, or
Yeah, so the money that we apply for gives our agency the funding to be able to have the staff to support that person. Okay. So that's what we are applying for, is to have enough funding, because we're bringing them in with the same staffing level, right? Because we have to it would either be giving less supports to somebody else who really need it, or waiting for a spot to come available, and then the people who've been sitting on the waiting list for, some of them, many years waiting for supports, still continue to languish on that waiting list. So this is one of the ways that the province is trying to manage some of that.
Thank you.
Next slide. These are the legislations that we are required to follow. So it's we fall under what we call SIPTA, which is the Services and Supports to Promote the Social Inclusion of Individuals with Developmental Disabilities. So that's a mouthful. But then we are also required to follow Regulation 29910. Regulation 29910 is our quality assurance measures, and we are inspected annually under Regulation 29910. So we've just gone through in Owen Sound 2 weeks ago, and in Walkerton it was a month ago, and we're just waiting for the shoe to drop up in Bruce Peninsula to have our inspection in Bruce Peninsula. And I am very proud to say that both Walkerton and Owen Sound came through with flying colors. Next slide. So people, I've put this in here because people often are unclear as to what we can do and what we can't do. And it all falls under what those legislations are. So we can support people with activities of daily living, and we do that both in our supported group living environments, as well as people who are living in supported independent living and in our youth transition home, and in our 1290 apartments. One of the critical things that we do is we support people to navigate and connect with systems, because one of the things that one of the issues, and it's been around for years, it's been around in my career as a whole of 45 years, is systems sometimes themselves don't connect very well. So one of our key things, and our staff are amazing at it, is to be able to navigate the systems and to support people to connect within those systems so that they don't fall through the cracks and they don't inadvertently do something that that puts things like their ODSP payments on hold, that kind of thing. We support them. We can support them to connect with community supports. And often those community supports are our community partners, where we, as time goes on, we're becoming much, it used to be we did everything, but we can't do everything. And we're really building some very strong connections with our community partners. support to develop and implement and reach goals, strategies to address challenges in life. So that's where that kind of case management, we do a lot of harm reduction with people, including going out on the streets and looking for those people who are experiencing homelessness, or those who are precariously housed, to make sure they still have a roof over their head. And that includes keeping some people's medications in our office, and on a daily basis, looking for them to give them their medications. Going to find them if they've got a virtual appointment with their psychiatrist or with the dual diagnosis team, bringing them into our office so that they have a place to do those virtual appointments and to be there with them, so that we're hearing the same thing at the same time, and then to be able to help them kind of navigate through all the pieces that come out of that. Next slide, please.
Joanne, I'm just going to interrupt you there before you
Yep.
go to the next one. I just want to be respectful of time, because we're trying to
Yep.
keep each presentation to around 20, 25 minutes.
Yeah.
And we're
Yeah, I've just got a couple more to go and I'm pretty well done.
Okay. Great, thank you.
So this, then we support with managing challenging behaviors. We support people in developing behavior support plans. And we will develop them with somebody, but we cannot implement them without a physician signing off on it. So that we can't just implement something and say, hey, we're doing this. We have to make sure that the professionals are on board and that it is safe as well. And then we work with regional support associates who are with those people who have much more complex support needs. It's an agency that has behavior analysts and specialists at it. Next slide. We cannot physically restrain somebody. We cannot put someone in restraints. We cannot lock somebody in a room. We cannot, so this is the next one's around that clinician piece. And all our staff are trained in nonviolent crisis intervention. And what the goal is, what staff have to do is remove themselves from the situation versus having to put somebody in restraints. The only time we would do that is if that staff can't get out and is not, and it becomes a very risky situation. Next slide. So here's some of the trends and gaps that I've already spoken about. So we've already spoken about the increase in the number of youth who historically we did not support, but now do. Increase in the number of people with dual diagnosis. Increase in substance use, where we very rarely saw it. Our staff have become very adept in working with people with substance use issues. Lack of affordable and appropriate housing. Aging families who have their adult children living at home with them and who are going into crisis. The system set up that foster siloing of services, and those are some of the things that this community is working really hard to work through, and we are all experiencing staffing challenges. Next slide, please. So, like I said, we've been working really hard to develop partnerships and really seeing that we can't do it alone. And some of the key partnerships that we've developed really positive relationships with is the dual diagnosis team at the hospital, CMHA, Y Housing, Grey County Housing. We're developing some very positive relationships there. Other housing providers, so the local rooming houses and whatnot. Police, we're on a first name, one button push relationship there. EMS, Safe and Sound, Food Bank. Again, 8 years ago, these relationships were just periphery. Now they've become essential. Next slide. And I believe that's it. These are just some links for you.
Okay, Joanne, I just wanted to ask that $8.13 million budget that you're talking about, is it completely separate from the individual payments that go to each person? Or is
No, that was our budget for last year, and it includes those that individualized funding that comes in with youth. So that goes into the base budget. If a youth happens to move elsewhere, we then have to take that and move that money. The ministry moves that money. It does not include the passport dollars, where people choose what they can do with that.
Right. Okay, any other questions for Joanne?
Shirley,
you go ahead.
Thanks very much, Chair O'Leary, and thank you, Joanne, for your very interesting and informative presentation. I just wondered if you could speak to if there is a relationship or partnership with our local community living organizations, or does Owen Sound oversee some of the clients who might live in other communities? We have a very strong and active community living here in Meaford, and I just wondered if you could speak to any collaborations with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our children's services support the family out there, because Meaford doesn't have children's services and family services until they're 18. But yes, we are well connected with all of the other community livings. We have what we call a regional service providers table that meets every 2 months, and we discuss kind of local or regional issues there. We also, if we have somebody that is really struggling, we pull together a service solution table from and it includes people from every agency to talk through those things. So yes, as a region, we work closely together.
You good, Shirley?
Yes, Brian, thank you.
Okay, Warden Hicks, go ahead.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following up on your question, Joanne, first, thank you for the presentation. You mentioned that all of your clients are eligible for ODSP. So does that funding that Councillor O'Leary asked about, is that in addition to the individualized ODSP allowances that would be given to the clients?
Yes. So their ODSP, their ODSP amount is $11.49 is what they receive. So that's for their rent, their housing, their food, their personal needs. All of the support, so the staffing dollars, that's the money we get from the ministry. So the people do not have to pay that out of their pocket, those people who get individualized funding.
Right. So obviously then, if we take housing alone, there would be a gap. Because the ODSP wouldn't pay for, many of the examples that you showed in your presentation. So how do you manage that gap?
Well, the housing that we have, so we keep the so our 1290 apartments, and then our youth transition house. So we only charge people $500 a month for that. Mm-hmm. So we keep that. So the issue for us, or the gap for us, is the housing in the community and finding housing for people. We will sometimes have two people that get along really, really well together, and they might share an apartment together and be able to try and kind of put their money together, but we have to work closely with ODSP on that because we're always afraid that they're going to lose some of that housing funding, all of that kind of thing. So it's, yeah, I'm regularly in my inbox. Email pops up because I'm on all of the staff email groups for each of the programs on a regular basis. I get an email popping up saying, hey, I got somebody that's losing their housing. Does anybody have a line on something?
So you mentioned in your presentation that you're dealing with clients who have increasingly more complex behavioral challenges, which must mean conversely that you have to have staff with increasing skill levels.
Yes.
And when I go to your website and I go to the community living website for Hanover, I see on the front page, we're hiring, and then look into the section you're hiring for. Many of them are part-time positions. So how are you managing? Because you kind of glossed over the hiring challenges. Can you tell me a little bit more about what the real challenges are in terms of staffing?
So our challenges with staffing are exactly kind of as you outlined there is our challenges are just not being able to find staffing. Number one. And then the other piece is finding staffing with the requisite skills. So we have a team that we're trying to hire for here in Walkerton, and it's for a gentleman who does have very high needs and will be in that intensive residential model where he will require 2-on-1 staffing. And we are needing very specific skills to be able to support him. We have had a posting out to try and find people for his team. And the requisite skills that are going to be needed, the requisite education that's going to be needed. We've had a posting out for 4 months and we have not had one come in yet. Mm-hmm. So of course, then we are reaching out. So he's currently not living in his home. He's living in a therapeutic center, and we can't get him home as we're trying to maneuver through this. So we're having to reach out across the province to different agencies and say, hey, how can we find people here? It's a real struggle for us. So it's just the number of staff, the skill level, and it's how do we attract people with those skill levels to our region. One of the things I've put out to the executive directors and CEOs that sit at our regional service providers table is I've been analyzing the data around complex people. People with really complex needs, what families are doing is they're having to find somewhere an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours away from home for their loved one to go and live because there is no place here to do it. And we in this, and like, that's unfair. That's unfair. So that is something that we're having to look at, how can we do that in this region? But then the piece that goes with that is how do we attract people to live in this region who has that skill set, which includes that skill set to be able to support those, people like those 16 people in Owen Sound alone who are precariously housed or living on the streets because of their mental health and their addictions, as well as their intellectual disabilities.
Mr. Chairman, my final question. We're a task force. Yeah. And what, we're obviously going to be coming up with a report at the end of this. What 2 or 3 things would you like to see in our report in terms of recommendations coming out of this task force?
Ooh, that's a hard one. and I think some of this work is actually already starting within Grey County, is the housing safe, affordable, and appropriate housing. And coming from a housing first perspective. Because all the research will tell you, again, like I said, I came out of the being an executive director for many, many years in the I was one of the people that sat on the original task force to end homelessness in the city of Calgary. And as we were researching there, you know, the housing first philosophy is really important, because research shows that if you tell somebody they have to be ready for housing first, so they have to get their act together, but they have no place to get their act together, how are they going to get their act together? Like, it just creates a vicious cycle, right? So coming from that housing first, harm reduction perspective.
Okay, you good, Buck? Okay, I'm going to go back to Councillor Keaveney. Go ahead, Shirley.
Thank you, Chair O'Leary. When, as you were speaking about staffing challenges, and I certainly sympathize, and I don't know if you do get involved with service animals at all, but is there a place for service dogs and so on in your programs, and can they be helpful to any of the people that you support?
We've supported people who have service dogs. Yeah, but we haven't done it in a formal perspective. It's people who actually have them, and then we support them. In our supported group homes, that becomes a bit of a challenge because of staffing allergies, those kinds of things as well. It's a balance for us.
Okay, Joanne, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I think we'll wrap that up and move on. So thank you very much for your presentation this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, item number 4, coordinated access and by names list. We have Josh Gibson and Caitlin Curry up. Good morning.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning, members of the committee. Caitlin really deserves all the praise for this presentation she's going to be bringing forward for you today. And I'm just here basically to provide an introduction and then help out with any questions that I can around the end. You'll be familiar with a lot of the content because it was part of the enumeration report that was brought in January to council. But since then, a lot of work's been done locally to try and bolster some of the efforts that we're making. And Caitlin's going to touch more in depth around the coordinated access and the by names list piece today. So Caitlin is the homelessness response coordinator for Grey and Bruce, and she works primarily out of our office, but she supports both counties. And she joined us from the Peterborough area in November and has been an amazing addition to the team with a ton of experience around homelessness and short-term shelter and all of the pieces that attribute to somebody losing or having difficulty obtaining housing. So I'll turn it over to Caitlin. I think she's going to share her presentation with you, and I'll be around for questions at the end. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. Good morning, Caitlin.
Great, thank you. And I'm just not seeing the option to share my screen. Oh, sorry, I found it there. Great. Thank you. So thank you for having me today, and thank you for this committee for clearly being invested in housing and seeing that it is related to mental health and addiction issues as well. And I really just wanted to reiterate housing being a social determinant of health and quality of life as well. On this first slide, you'll see these are all the agencies that are currently involved in the coordinated access leadership part of the system. So I just wanted to sort of mention these agencies so that you were all aware. The first image you see is how the homelessness system has historically and traditionally looked. So it's been more like a maze. Clients have frequently been required to repeat their stories over and over as they try to find the correct entry point into the homelessness system. It's operated on a first come, first served model, and most frequently housing is offered to whichever client is asking when it is available. Clients and frontline workers are required to be system savvy and know the right people to make the right connections to find the right housing. Those who are offered housing resources are often presenting with less complicated situations and frequently are those who would be more likely to resolve their own homelessness with light touch supports. And many will be considered to have burnt bridges, and all future opportunities will be impacted by this. So, as I mentioned, this is how the system has historically and traditionally operated, but we're working to move it more towards a graphic like this. And it is a system that is more coordinated, efficient, and also trauma informed. So the coordinated system seeks to ensure that there's multiple entry points into the system that all flow through a consistent process and outflows to housing resources that are the right resource at the right time for the right person. It connects the emergency side of the system to the solution side of the system. And for clients, there's no need to repeat their story or trauma numerous times when they don't want to or don't need to. An individual's housing plan is supported by all services across the community, working together to find and retain housing. And supports and services are matched based on needs and preferences, not first come, first serve. It moves away from that model, a model that relies on individuals being the best advocate in order to access resources. And instead, this system ensures that individuals can enter the system from any door and be served in a manner that meets their needs. And as I mentioned, there's no wrong door to services. Fair and transparent access to resources are available no matter which service is accessed or not accessed. There's no need to rely on staff to advocate for access to resources because the system flows in a way that meets the level of need. So a coordinated access system is what it sounds like. It's a coordinated and collaborative effort to more effectively serve individuals and households experiencing homelessness within our communities, and specifically the most vulnerable individuals experiencing homelessness. There are a few fundamental pillars to this approach, which I'll outline in more detail. And the first is a common entry and navigation process. So this includes an access, so a common intake, triage, so a system that is able to refer individuals to emergency services and supports, a prioritization system, and matching and referral to housing programs and other services across the community. So we often use the triage station in an emergency department as an example of how coordinated access works on a practical level. So let's say Jeff breaks his arm and comes to the emergency room. The triage nurse completes a quick intake with Jeff and collects some standard information. She then performs a quick assessment, the same assessment that is given to anyone presenting in the ER. And this helps to determine how urgent Jeff's needs are relative to other patients in the waiting room. The nurse identifies that while Jeff's broken arm isn't important to attend to as soon as possible, there are 3 individuals who are experiencing heart issues who need to be provided with services first, and there's only 1 ER doctor available. Any follow-up after the ER visits are recorded in the same medical information system, so Jeff's family doctor and ER doctor are aware that he's been referred to physical therapy as a follow-up to the emergency services provided. So this is the way in which we hope to work towards a more coordinated system using the same model within the homelessness system as well. Another fundamental value that is behind the coordinated access system is a no wrong door approach. As I have alluded to already, the coordinated access system seeks to ensure that households can enter the system through any avenue and receive a consistent level of appropriate support. The goal of this new system is to equip all individuals working with people experiencing homelessness, so not only individuals working within the homelessness system, but within any system that serves individuals experiencing homelessness, with the knowledge and skills to support individuals in accessing the homelessness system. So as I mentioned, this not only refers to agencies that are working exclusively or almost exclusively with individuals experiencing homelessness, such as Y Housing, Safe and Sound, Mawikwadong Supportive Housing Program, but also with agencies that, while they don't work within housing, they work with individuals who are homeless or at risk. And they often have strong rapport with individuals they work with. For example, these agencies could include Ontario Works, paramedics or police, CMHA. The second fundamental approach that informs the local coordinated access system is the Housing First approach, which was mentioned during the past presentation. And Housing First is an evidence-based practice that advocates for a movement away from the idea of being housing ready and towards a recognition that housing is a fundamental right that households ought to be able to access despite any other barriers they are facing in their life, such as mental health concerns, addictions, or criminalization. Housing First recognizes that housing stabilization actually enables households to stabilize in other aspects of their life. But that being said, housing is not a magical solution. This stabilization often requires supports that range in intensity depending on the household's level of need. The term Housing First was coined in the US, and it refers to a matrix of policy and services responses relating to the idea that one cannot expect people experiencing homelessness to simply pull themselves out of extremely dire circumstances and demonstrate that they are housing ready while still living in a shelter outside. From a service delivery perspective, Housing First is a recovery-oriented approach focused on quickly moving people from homelessness into housing and then providing supports necessary to maintain the stability. And I can't stress it enough that the supports to maintain stability are a fundamental aspect of Housing First. Rather than requiring people who are experiencing homelessness to first resolve the challenges that contribute to their housing instability, including addictions or mental health issues, Housing First approach emphasizes that recovery should begin with stable housing. Housing First has been shown to increase housing stability, improve quality of life, improve health and addiction outcomes, reduce involvement with police and justice systems, reduce costs associated with the justice and health systems, and reduce hospitalization and emergency room visits. So the by name list is at the heart of the coordinated access system. And to put simply, this is a list of every consenting household experiencing homelessness across Grey and Bruce. The goal of this list is to know individuals by name and support them in a unified system to exit homelessness permanently. While providers play different roles, the roles providers can play within the by name list are clear. There are providers that come into contact with people experiencing homelessness and will add to and update the by name list or make referrals to those in our community who are responsible for doing so. So, for example, these could include shelters or the motel program locally, drop-in programs, outreach. It could also include income supports, food banks, health systems, justice systems. Some communities have even included libraries, as they often see folks experiencing homelessness accessing the space. And there are also providers who have housing resources who will house people from the by name list. And important to note that in this, we're not only talking about bricks and mortar housing, we're talking about housing subsidies, and probably most importantly, the case management supports that come with that. What these providers look like and how they'll work together within our system will vary based on the mandates and capacity of providers. But we started by engaging providers who have a direct mandate to work specifically with people experiencing homelessness. So, for example, as I mentioned, the emergency motel program, street outreach, and we continue to extend this by partnering with agencies that are more tangentially a part of the homelessness system, such as OW, mental health providers, hospitals, the SOS team, which includes paramedics. And we can also learn and be inspired by other communities, as I mentioned. So, for example, communities that have engaged libraries, have engaged schools, as well as family and children's services. Those providers who will be removing people from the by name list through permanent housing and supports can include housing providers, so such as the county housing, for example, that have dedicated 1 in 10 to the by name list. Could also include housing subsidies. And then again, can include case management supports to help people find and retain their housing. When we're working within the by name list, we're seeking to coordinate and streamline efforts to identify and house people as quickly as possible, all through the use of this list. Now let's focus on exit points from the homelessness system. As a part of the by name list referral is a common assessment that aims to better understand a household's acuity or level of need. This not only informs the way in which households are prioritized, which I'll discuss in detail shortly, but also what resources would be best prioritized for that particular household. For households that are presenting with more complex issues, connecting them to intensive case management and supportive housing would set them up best for the opportunity for success in housing. Whereas households that are experiencing a housing crisis but are lower acuity, they may benefit best from light touch supports and engagement. It wouldn't be beneficial to connect someone who is experiencing homelessness for the first time due to job loss with an ACT worker at the hospital, or vice versa. Someone who is street entrenched and experiencing chronic homelessness likely wouldn't benefit from simply being provided with housing listings and encouragement. So part of the coordinated access system is to understand the level of need that households are presenting with, to understand the level of need that our resources aim to meet, and then to connect those. Another key tool offered by the by name list is data. This data supports the system at two levels: person-specific level data and system-level data. Person-specific data refers to the information we gain through tracking individual households through the homelessness system by the by name list. System-level data refers to the tracked changes of the entire population experiencing homelessness that enables us to measure progress and improvements. Because the by name list is interacted with on a weekly and often daily level, this means that the data we have access to is up to date and reflective of the current community landscape. So instead of having data that we review on a quarter or bi-yearly or a yearly basis where we produce a snapshot of statistical data from, say, a year ago, the by name list is being updated every week. Community partners are constantly reaching out to me and giving me new information about individuals on the by name list. And that means that the data we have today is more accurate to what is actually happening on the ground today. So what does this data look like in action? System level data allows us to ask questions like, did chronic homelessness decline overall? Are there more households with chronic health conditions this month than there was last month? And with data to answer these questions, we can identify solutions and approaches that work towards ending homelessness through data-driven approaches that can shift to support new trends in the data. Without system-level data, our community cannot track progress, advocate, or allocate resources based on up-to-date real numbers, and we can also make projections and work towards meaningful goals. Ultimately, we will know what is and what isn't working. Person-specific data enables us to ask specific questions like, did specific people experiencing homelessness within our communities? We can ask questions like, did Andrea get housed? How long has Andrea been experiencing chronic homelessness? And by asking these questions, we can use this data to provide a coordinated access to housing and supports. Without person-specific data, we could accidentally duplicate aggregated data and misallocate resources. This data enables us to coordinate case planning and case conferencing to better support individuals. We can set and work towards housing people as quickly as possible based on local priorities, and we can actually quantify what housing resources are needed to end chronic homelessness locally. Now I'd like to pause and just summarize the benefits of the by name list and coordinated access system. So firstly, it produces a smarter triage system, allowing us to target the limited housing resources to the most vulnerable households. It also enables us to stretch the limited resources further by connections between households to cost-effective supports. The by name list ultimately improves systems. We can use data to see trends, flag bottlenecks, identify opportunities for improvements across our systems. And in identifying these opportunities, this process also allows us to test new strategies and quickly learn whether or not they are working to reach our goals. Lastly, This system change enables resource advocacy. We can ground this advocacy in concrete data and use our monthly data trends to make realistic projections and quantify projected system needs and gaps. So what is the data locally telling us? So this data is as of the last day in May 2022. And as I mentioned, there's 215 households, so that includes individuals, couples, or families who are actively experiencing homelessness in Grey Bruce. And the majority of them, 141 of these households, are in Grey County. It can often be challenging to determine the exact numbers within Grey County because we know that the borders between the two counties are very loose and people move between them really frequently. So someone may have had their referral completed in Bruce County, but then quickly left the county and are now in Grey County. So that's just something to keep in mind with these numbers. 102 of the 141 households in Grey are chronically homeless. So that means that they experienced at least 6 months of homelessness over the last 12 months. This is a very, very high number. And also around their level of needs. So we kind of organize it into low acuity, mid acuity, and high acuity. We'll see that the majority are in the lower acuity mark with 40%, but it's fairly evenly spread out. And we still have a significant number of individuals that are meeting that threshold for high acuity. In terms of demographics, there were of the Grey County households, there was 24 youth-led households, 47 Indigenous households, and 28 families. And in particular, I want to highlight the Indigenous households, which are disproportionately represented amongst this data. In terms of mental health and addictions, we can see that the total number of individuals on the list compared to the number of individuals who identified having a mental health concern and the number of individuals who identified having an addiction concern, and it's quite high. And also keeping in mind that in some cases, individuals may not have disclosed, so the numbers are likely higher. So I've mentioned prioritization a number of times throughout this presentation. And before we end, I'd like to explain prioritization and touch on what and who we are specifically prioritizing locally. So to put simply, prioritization is the process and action of deciding the relative importance and urgency of serving a particular household ahead of another based upon transparent and defensible criteria. In terms of homelessness in Grey County, we are seeking to prioritize households that, due to their intersecting identities and experiences, are at an elevated risk of adverse effects from their experience of homelessness. So why do we prioritize? We do this because there are often more households experiencing homelessness than the system has the capacity to serve. As a result, we must take careful and intentional consideration into how the limited resources can be allocated in order to have the biggest impact. Additionally, and for these reasons, the province of Ontario has also indicated that service managers are responsible for ensuring that the by name list can and has supported prioritization. So let's revisit the healthcare system for an example of prioritization, such as the kidney transplant list. So patients are added to the transplant list at different times and for different reasons. All are prioritized based on their level of need, and people may move higher up on the list as their health deteriorates and their likelihood of surviving without a new kidney declines. Because the wait can be years, patients cannot simply remain on the list until their name reaches the top. Instead, they are supported to stabilize their health and decrease their risk level as best as possible via alternative interventions. Some people may find a family donor and be able to resolve their situation on their own. However, even when a kidney becomes available, it does not necessarily go to the person who's at the top of the list. In order to ensure the match is appropriate, the patient must be the appropriate blood type and age to receive the available kidney. The priority list is simply a way of determining, of all of those eligible to receive this kidney, Who has the greatest need at the time it becomes available? These same principles are applied when prioritizing for resources in the homelessness system. So what are we prioritizing? We are prioritizing, as I mentioned, those who are experiencing chronic homelessness. So again, that's 6 months over the last 12-month period. Youth, so individuals that are 16 to 24. Indigenous households, and again, this speaks to the overrepresentation of Indigenous households disproportionate to the population. Those struggling with mental health, physical health, and substance use concerns, and those sleeping outside or environments that are not fit for humans to sleep in. Oops. It is important to note that when we are talking about prioritization, we're specifically talking about housing resources, which you'll recall from the beginning of this presentation can refer to physical bricks and mortar housing units, rental subsidies, or case management supports. Prioritization criteria are not applied to emergency supports such as the motel program. And in many communities, prioritization is something that is already practiced. So the shift to coordinated access really just means documenting and standardizing and making more transparent those existing practices. And finally, I want to end by acknowledging that the Nameless and coordinated access system is a part of a greater countrywide movement to better serve households experiencing homelessness. We have been able to look to other communities further along in the process for guidance and best practices while we work towards being counted as a community that has ended chronic homelessness. We're certainly in the process and we have a lot of work to do, but we're making headway in terms of coming together as a system to better coordinate efforts. Thank you.
Boy, that's a lot of information. Good job. Thank you. Caitlin, when you, I love to set goals and I like to see other people set goals and organizations, but I have to ask, when you talk about working towards ending homelessness, is that really an attainable goal or should we be talking about reduction?
I think it's about talking about ending chronic homelessness. We're not going to end, realistically, we're not going to end homelessness. People will always experience things in their life that put their housing at risk and maybe lose their housing. But it's about ending that chronic entrenched homelessness where people are just can't get out of that cycle of homelessness. And I do think that's a realistic goal. And there are communities across Canada that have already done this.
Great, thanks. Other questions for Caitlin or Josh?
Sorry, not necessarily a question. I just wanted to emphasize Caitlin's presentation really talked about the system, and it is a massive shift in what we've traditionally done. So it is about just explaining what's important about it. But I want to emphasize something that Caitlin talked about around matching and selection. It's really important. People talk about housing first, and like Caitlin said, it's not a magic bullet that's going to solve the issues. Once we provide somebody with housing, there has to be a very high level of support, and the person has to be accepting of that support. We have recently experienced a failure of a matching, and it wasn't good because you really want to help every single person that walks through the door and have a successful tenancy. And in this particular situation, the tenancy lasted less than a month, and there was supports there trying to knock on the door 2 to 3 times a week, and just the support wasn't being accepted, and ultimately it was causing enough issues within the building that we had to ask them to leave. So it's not about just housing, it is about support and having those supports available and having them be accepted. So thank you very much, Caitlin. That was excellent.
I think also on that note, I just want to mention that it's also why we need a variety of different opportunities and resources for people, including various case management intensive or light touch support, because everyone is entitled to housing and we have to meet people where they're at. So maybe that intensive supports are not what someone wants. So then finding something in the private market with the supports of them continuing to keep that is also significant.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're going to go to Councillor Mackey. Good morning, Scott.
Morning, Chair O'Leary, and morning, other members of the committee. Thanks very much, Caitlin. I got a lot of questions, but I'll start with I guess the first one is our by names list. What percentage of the overall wait list are we allowed to put on the by names list? If it is a percentage, I'm wondering what that is. Because my sense is that with the by names list, we are able to move the high priority ones up the wait list and get them into housing quicker. So I'm just wondering what percentage are able to go on to the by names list.
Anne-Marie, did you want to jump in on that one?
Sure. So everybody that we come in contact that is experiencing homelessness goes on our by names list. Our other wait list for our internal housing in Grey County, we house 1 person in every 10 off of the by name list. So if they are working with us under the by name list program, we look at 1 in 10 putting into our own building with supports.
Thank you. That was my first question, Mr. Chair. The second, Caitlin talked about extensive case supervision. I'm just wondering who is providing that, and if that's county staff or whether we're relying on other agencies for that case supervision.
Currently, the county does fund to Canadian Mental Health Association workers to provide that support, but it's not enough. So my hope is that we see more case management that is provided through other agencies that have their own expertise connected to the by name list.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think, for some of these, very chronic cases, it's the intensive support and case management that's certainly required. At least that's been my experience. One just final question. I've got a whole bunch, but I know there's others I probably want to ask. People from outside of Grey and Bruce counties, are they able to put their name onto our subsidized housing list? And I'm just wondering where our wait times are compared to, other areas within Southwestern Ontario, and whether you're seeing an influx of people, maybe from the Kitchener area, because the wait lists are much longer, applying for our wait lists up here. Thanks.
I can take that one, Caitlin. So for our standard waiting list for rent guaranteed income housing, you are eligible to get on that waiting list if you're a resident of Grey or Bruce or not. The waiting times right now, we may be slightly less than the rest of the province in terms of the average wait time. It is creeping up a little bit just because there's not quite as much turnover in some of the units because the private market's not as affordable. In order to be on the by name list, however, you would have to have a reasonable connection to the area and be unable to resolve your own homelessness to be put on that list. That would not be for individuals from outside of the area.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to go to Allison Goldberg. Good morning, Allison.
Good morning. I am with the Community Drug and Alcohol Strategy, and I just wanted to recognize some of the concepts brought up by Caitlin and by Joanne around harm reduction, and recognize that there is work being done at Grey County to move towards a harm reduction lens in many of the internal programming, and that this was originally discussed last year when the drug strategy presented to Grey County around solutions to end the drug poisoning crisis. And in your committee report in January 2022, one of the calls to action that was endorsed by county was assessing the need for internal harm reduction education and identifying opportunities to incorporate harm reduction into current policies and practices. And then there was a list of a number of specific objectives and goals that the county could work towards. So I just wanted to highlight those and say that the drug strategy looks forward to continuing that conversation with the staff, and that training has already begun to happen within the county, and just really acknowledge and celebrate the housing first approach in that, recognizing that people with substance use disorder have a fundamental and human right to housing, and that perhaps sometimes when we're housing someone who has a substance use disorder and their path is not abstinence or 12-step recovery, that there are supports and services offered not just internal to the county, but from external partners as well to support that person, whatever they choose in terms of their own health and wellness. So I just wanted to recognize that and say thank you and look forward to our continued partnership.
Great, thanks, Allison. Any other questions?
I think just to add to what Allison was saying too, Grey County has been a leader in that. I think locally we do have a fairly large representation of housing that is recovery based locally that's offered by some nonprofits. And as a result, the 1 in 10 units through Grey County are being prioritized in a way that's meeting the needs of folks that are using substances and are not at a point of recovery.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go to Scott again.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess if no one else, I'll step in again. I'm just going back to the presentation we had from Joanne. I think she had 16 cases of individuals with developmental disabilities or dual diagnosis that were experiencing homelessness. Just wondering if those individuals would meet the criteria for our by names list. The first question. And then secondly, she talked about the transitional age youth and pre-planning for them starting at, age 16 or 17, when they reach adulthood. Just wondering if individuals like that, can they be added to our list, prior to their 18th birthday for subsidized housing? Thanks.
So I think the quick answer to the first one is yes. Anybody experiencing homelessness could be added to the by names list. And anybody that's able to live independently that's 16 years of age or older can apply for housing.
So I guess my question, Josh, if they're supported through the youth system up until their 18th birthday, knowing that there may not be adult supports available for them when they reach 18, could they be added to the Grey County list, a couple of years prior, knowing that that date is coming along? Could they be added to the list? And, situations may change, but when they turn 18, they would have already been on the list and maybe, closer to that acceptance date?
Yep, they could apply at 16, so 2 years before they turned 18.
All right, thank you.
Okay, not seeing any other questions. Okay, so we'll move on. Thank you very much to Caitlin and Josh. Item number 5, we go to Dr. Zayed from Public Health to speak on our work group update. Good morning, Dr. Zayed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Just to change gears, there is some updates on the work that is done for the task force. I want to share it with the task force, which is some progress and updates that may be of significant support to the local action on the drug and opioid crisis. So as a quick background, that the COMO working group on drug and opioid crisis that was developed a few months back and had sought a focal priority action on the crisis. And they developed alpha resolution that was passed defining 9 priorities for multi-sectoral response for the opioid and the drug crisis. And also working on this priority, starting to work on this priority put this priority into actions. So the main some of these priorities are related to the prevention side, which is enhance and ensure sustainability of support for substance use prevention and mental health promotion initiatives, with a focus on early childhood and adolescence, in addition to expanding the collection, analysis, and reporting of timely integrated epidemiological data initiative to guide resource allocation, frontline programs, and service, and inform healthy public policy. So I thought really what the action that was developed after these 9 priorities is the development of not a working group, a committee or a subgroup out of this working group. And this committee is composed of 7 public health units, and Grey Bruce Health Unit was selected to be the chair of this group, or a co-chair with a partnership with Public Health Ontario. And the support from Public Health Ontario is really an important support for the local action. So I started with the Public Health Ontario for this week to develop the terms of reference. And the main objectives of this group or committee is to understand the evidence-based intervention for preventing substance-related harm among youth, including mitigating adverse childhood experiences. And we have a very important initiatives that we can work on regarding the adverse childhood experiences. So moving this crisis upstream is really important over the long term. The second objective is understand the evidence-based intervention that integrate the social determinants of health and address the impact of structural discrimination and experiences of marginalization. And that's also if we action that at a local level and with the expertise from Public Health Ontario, it will be of a great benefit. The third objective is describing the local programming in Ontario in the context of relevant evidence. So again, we have many programs at the local level working on the same subject, mental health promotion or opioid crisis. So trying to have this kind of centralization of these programs and make evidence-based action of the coordinated action of these programs would be very helpful. And finally develop a framework to map areas of coverage and gaps for intervention, consider overlap with mental health promotion. So there is of course, through our discussion, there are gaps, so we need to really identify this gap and streamline the action for that. There is, the committee is working for 1 year as initial work and then will be reassessed after that. There are, so we are also, that's very important from the start to identify deliverables. So there are 3 deliverables for this committee. The first deliverable is an environmental scan of early child and youth program mapped on to evidence effectiveness on substance use outcome. And this will be related to intervention approaches at the local population context, consider knowledge translation, and we will work with some knowledge translation centers in Canada, not necessarily in the province. And the second deliverable is a summary of current epidemiology. So analysis of Public Health Ontario in collaboration with Public Health Ontario EPI group, and consider the data from the public health units, all our data that we get from paramedic, emergency, and other data, so we can have some consolidated data that can help or inform our indicator for work, and support the knowledge exchange characteristic. Also working with Ontario Drug Policy and Research Network and the Office of the Chief Coroner, who is also who's recently recruited Dr. Matthew Hodges, who is also a public health physician, which is really a great advantage. The third deliverable is a grant proposal for conceptual framework for action. And we also identified, again, the chart or for timelines and deliverables to work with the group. And I will meet with this group in August. At the end of the year, so from August 2023, we will have an evaluation about the work and the deliverables. So I think it will be a good experience, especially trying to get everything together and have this public health approach as a leadership for the crisis. So that's my update.
Thank you, Dr. Zayed. When you talked about the 7 health units coming together, do you find that the challenges are consistent with all of the other health units?
Yes, the challenge is consistent. There are, of course, some, and this is important to identify different gaps. There are gaps related to urban area versus rural areas. There are also things that we are going to do in terms of feasibility studies. For example, when we talk about safe consumption site or safe injection site, does that work in a rural area similar to urban? The answer is no. We have to really have every action based on a feasibility study or what really works for each community.
Okay.
Like just an example. Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Zayed? Oh, Allison Goldberg. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no? Hi. I do have a question. Just wanting to clarify. So on the last topic there, feasibility for safe consumption sites, for example, would that be within the scope of the prevention subgroup of COMO, or would that be a task to another subgroup of COMO?
No, we have a work group, a main work group for COMO, and we are discussing if this feasibility study will be under the environmental scan or the conceptual framework, or it will be under the main work group. We are still discussing that, but this is something that I just give it as an example of how things could be different between health unit at the local level.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to hear about this work happening at the provincial level, and I look forward to connecting with you and your team, Dr. Zayed, through the work of the drug strategy. I also just wanted to connect the dots for council members that the drug strategy in partnership with public health and CMHA presented last year around this time on solutions to end the drug poisoning crisis. So I've heard Dr. Zayed said before in meetings, like locally, we're kind of ahead of the curve in terms of advocating and raising awareness about what these policy solutions are. So the policy solutions that Dr. Zayed talked about today related to COMO very much mirror the solutions that were presented to council last year. So I'm just going to put those in the chat just for reference for the minutes. Some of the information provided in our presentation last year is more Grey Bruce centric. So that just might help provide some context for the minutes. I just wanted to connect those dots for council and just say that there's still like so much work to do in terms of advocating for the provincial leadership and coordination that is needed to end this drug poisoning crisis. And I really look forward to working with our local health unit to elevate this issue at the provincial and federal level. Thank you.
And just to mention that also Grey Bruce Health Unit has really taken a leadership role of presenting a previous resolution to ALPHA about the importance of provincial work, in addition to a letter sent to the Minister of Mental Health and the Minister of Health about the importance of the provincial action. And one of the things that ALPHA is taking is to have this work group and really focusing on the adverse childhood experiences that we think really is very key.
Okay, looking for more questions. Not seeing any. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Dr. Zayed. Appreciate it. and Allison for your input. We'll move on to item number 6, other business. I always look at you, Kim, for additional business. Is there anything to add?
Not at this time, Mr. Chair. We have an upcoming meeting in August. The plan, if everything comes together, is at that time we'll be providing draft recommendations, kind of in an outline of the final report for consideration and input by the members of the task force.
Okay, thanks. As mentioned, the next meeting is August 9th. Number 8 is adjournment. I need a mover and a seconder, please. Scott and Dwight, all in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.